life is either like solving problems or building solutions, right? So like strategy, you could position that as either one of those things. You don't want to build solutions for problems that don't exist, yet you don't want to always be looking like backwards at like just problems. So it's sort of a balance between those two things, I would say. And I get this question a lot, like business strategy versus brand strategy. Like, what's the difference? What do you do? Brand is like a very like emotional thing. Brand is not something that is like owned by the business unit. Even if they say they own it, they really don't. Brand is the audience, user, community, whatever you want to call it, interpretation, and how they take in sort of all of those brand expressions and how it makes them feel. So that's kind of brand strategy, whereas business strategy is like, what are our goals, objectives, like KPIs? The two are definitely intertwined because brand should support your business goals. But it's one way of driving that, right? So your business goals are, or your business strategy is also encompassing of product. It's also encompassing of oftentimes like, how do we architect a community? Like there are lots of things that go into business strategy, primarily like whatever you're selling, right? That's like the one thing. And then there are other ways, like other levers, right, that you pull. So it might be, regional expansion. It might be pricing. Like that's like more business, whereas brand is like all of those other, like how do we like emotionally connect? And then those other elements certainly tie into it. But a lot of what the way people connect with the brand is more about like the visuals, the tone of voice, the different touch points, right? The different like ways that you can cultivate like an emotional bond. And so I do both of those things. But primarily like my passion is where it is connecting, like that emotional connection, which is why I love brand and brand strategy. And I think it's a tough sell, because for a long time it's been like a big investment, like to invest in brand. But actually if you really break it down, like it's pretty simple. Like, and that's why I love like word of mouth marketing, because it's like and brand is sort of like a part of that. But yeah, so that's sort of how I define those two things. Did that answer the question?
That was great. How do you see the role of corporate strategy versus brand strategy and brand strategy in Web3? Like what
Yeah.
state are we in there? Should we be focusing more on one? Are we currently focusing more on one? What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny. Awaki just tweeted like this quote that was like, culture will always be more important than strategy, or something like that. I'm butchering the quote. Literally, like seconds before I hopped on here, and I was like, yeah, but like we still need strategy. I think like going back to what I said before, like you can't in Web3 in particular, it's a little bit harder to like architect these things, right? They don't exist in a vacuum. They don't exist in a boardroom. They are the byproduct a lot of times. If you're a decentralized brand, I should say, or if you're a decentralized organization, it is something that you have to kind of cultivate more organically. But there is a lot of like massaging that you can do within an organization. So I think it's just a different approach, but it's not to say that these organizations should be without a strategy. It's just a different approach to how you define that strategy, in my opinion. And I think you really want to align and engage a group of people in some kind of like vision or North Star, but then you also want to be able to, you can't rely on a vision to get people to that goal, right? Like you have to break it down further and define like, how are we going to get there? And if people don't have that, it causes them to be like really confused. It causes a lot of like spinning of wheels, and it causes a lot of like bad products to be made. So I think like it's not about like the strategy and being so rigid in it. It's about like defining a certain set of like short-term and long-term goals that like people can work towards and have like and create meaningful contributions around. Otherwise you just get people like it's just chaos in my opinion. And I actually think that decentralized organizations like need more process and more structure in a lot of ways in order to operate effectively. Like this idea of decentralization, like independent contributors just going off and doing stuff, like that doesn't really work. And like you're going to run out of money to fund these things, unless like the community, there's an appetite for it, for what you're doing, and then the community can fund it. And there are certainly a ton of mechanisms out there for people to spin out their own thing and do their own thing within a decentralized org. But like I think you need to have some structure in place. So not so much corporate strategy, just as like business strategy. And like corporate, I think you put that label on it and everyone is just like, no, I don't want to touch that. We're not corporate, anti. But just because we're all here trying to like change the world or reinvent systems, or create new systems, doesn't mean that we have to like buck everything and like throw everything that has worked out the window. I think we need to like take what works and then like adapt it to these new like working realities. And I think that that also, by us doing that, by us taking like these things that have worked and adopting them, it also brings us closer to the status quo. And so that will make people be like, oh, that organization has a really great strategy. I can see it. I see where they're going. Or that organization is a brand that I believe in. I can trust it. That's what's going to get the next million users, billion users into Web3. It's not just like YOLOing, having no structure, no path, because how do you get people like to get on board? And yes, there are some incredible leaders in this space who just are so great at motivating and making people feel empowered. But at the end of the day, if you want to really build like a sustainable organization, I think you need certain like structures in place. I'll caveat that by saying like it should not be so rigid that you feel like constrained or confined, and it should not be like overly prescriptive. It should definitely be more of like a living, breathing thing that evolves. And I find that that's the challenge with a lot of corporate strategies. They're planning so far out, they can't really see the trees through they're only looking at the forest. So like I think a lot of orgs have the problem where they can't see the forest, the trees. And I think corporates have the problem where like they can't actually like see the individual pieces and how they need to like alter their strategy because they're so focused on like what the vision is, or the longer term things, or the strategy itself. And I think that like vision without like kind of the mission and the pieces that ladder up to that is just kind of useless.